Fuck you, fuck your face, and fuck your day.
Del barrio pa'l mundo. Callejero, papi. No me ves una máquina dura, tú. No porque ya te. Me acuerdo cuando tú tenías todo. Yo era.
What's good, y'all? This is your boy, Internal Sadist, and this video is going to be about Red Pill Parenting 6. I made this video because I was in the middle of a live stream when these problems came up and people were talking about it, basically. So I decided to make this video to iron out those problems that I couldn't iron out in that live stream. The sucky part about it is it was the live stream was too chaotic to remotely try to earn out in the first damn place anyway. So it was one of those things where it's like I was gonna have to make a video no matter what. But the topic was about parenting, and the topics are going to be from that very live stream. The topics in this lovely live stream are going to be from that very live stream when it comes down to it. But the topics are parenting in the information age. That's going to be one of the topics. Media influence, worrying, parenting projection, the outcome, and my final thoughts. Obviously, my final thoughts always goes into these things, so it's not like it really matters. But I probably didn't even need to announce that. But typically, what happens in this day and age is, as a parent, forgive me, I'm cooking as I'm doing this live stream. Sorry about that. But typically, the problem with this day and age is it isn't the fact that we as parents have to protect our children. It's more or less the fact that we overdo it, or we over try to do it. So when they learn something, then they resent us, and then they want to go against us or rail against us for all intents and purposes as parents. The problem is you don't want to protect your child from everything. The world is a nasty world. Protecting your child from everything will end up with your child resenting you, and or your child going down dark paths that they don't need to go down. So it's one of those things where you have to address it to your children based on what you believe they're the acceptable age for your children to address each of those problems for all intents and purposes. Every parent is different. Every child is different. So that's all up to you how you judge it, your judgment, and your children's growth. So typically, you don't really want to shelter your children from the world, because the world's a dangerous place, and you don't want your children believing that we live in this world of unicorns and rainbows when in fact we really don't, unfortunately, which really sucks. I mean, if it was a Walgreens world, we probably live in a world of unicorns and rainbows, but we don't, like I said. So what you don't want to do is give your children false hope, or a false analogy, or a false belief in what the world actually is, or what it actually does, or how it actually works for all intents and purposes. You don't want to do that, because the minute you do that is the minute your child starts running into many, many, many problems, or many, many ridiculous problems for all intents and purposes. So you never want that to happen. You never want your child to run into a, a plethora of problems for no reason whatsoever. Um, which really sucks. Once you think about it, it does suck, because you want to protect your children, but you can't always overdo it, because you run the risk of damaging them or making them worse than what they really are. It'd be no different than if you were an absentee parent, basically. You basically run a risk of your child being fucked up for all intents and purposes. When you overindulge or try to over coddle or protect your children, you basically do the same damn damage that you would if you were to, not be there for them for all intents and purposes. Um, it sucks, but it is what it is. Um, but back to all the problems that were needed to be addressed in that last stream that couldn't get addressed due to the fact that it was just bonkers and out of control. Shout out to Money AD, by the way. The problem with parenting in this information age is people always overthink. People think way too much and they do less doing when it comes to parenting. That's one of the many problems that you'll run into in this day and age is the level of overthinking or the level of overthinking and lack of critical thinking that a lot of people do as parents to remotely protect their children. People overthink it, overshoot it, overstep their boundaries, and they wonder why their children grow up resenting them when in fact your children should love and respect and cherish you for all intents and purposes. Like a good example of that is my daughter, Deshari and Kieran. They both have cars, they both drive, they both are capable drivers. However, what I've noticed with them is even though they can drive, every now and again they would like me to drive them to school. That is the relationship that me and my children have because I've gave them the freedom that they I give them the freedom that they deserve and want and need in their life, so they can be better children for all intents and purposes. This is why Shari and Karen are the way they are because I parented them properly and I didn't have to worry about anything ever negative, negative outcome from them. So they drive to school and every now and again they want me to drive them to school. So that's always a plus when your children still want to be around you or hang with you, even if they're 16, 17 years old, which is actually very lovely. So you always want to build that rapport or that relationship with your children as their parent, not as their friend, as their parent, because building a friendship with your children isn't very healthy in the least bit. It's probably more destructive than anything for all intents and purposes. You never want to you never want to be destructive to your children's growth or destructive to your the needs and wants of your children and stuff. So you never want to do that for all intents and purposes because if you do, you're going to destroy your children nonetheless. Um, Another thing that a lot of people seem to forget when it comes to children is another thing that a lot of people seem to get when it comes to children is they forget to they forget to they forget to never forget what you actually taught your children and always be consistent in what you teach your children. Never being consistent on what you teach your children because that consistency makes for a better bond and a better relationship and a better growth in your child for all intents and purposes. However, you as a parent have to be there emotionally, mentally, and physically for your children when you actually do tell them things because sometimes it's not going to always pan out perfectly and you're going to have to be that parent to basically help them to lay them down slowly basically after you give them information about certain things. So you got to be mentally ready to do that as a parent for all intents and purposes. If you're not, then you're going to not raise you're not going to raise very productive people in society. And the sad part about that is if you give them sensory overload, you got to be there. You got to be there. You got to be ready to and prepared to actually be there for them. Because if you're not, then they'll grow up in the world. It ends up being like sensory overload for all intents and purposes, or information overload if you're not there for them. Because then their emotions will start swelling up, and everything else around them, emotions will start swelling up, and you run into other problems that really suck for all intents and purposes. So you want to be there for your children no matter what, even if it sucks or even if it's like a bad thing or a good thing. You want to be there for your children. Um, Another thing you want to do as a parent is addressing the problems when it comes to this information age, basically. Because the sad part about that, your children are always going to receive various and any type of information when it comes to things in the information age. The problem that you'll have with your children isn't the fact that is more so the fact that the lack of attention you're paying to your children. If you pay your attention, if you pay your children more attention, then they typically will be better adjusted human beings in this world. You pay them less attention and you plop them in front of a TV, then they're going to be less inclined to actually do things. And the sad part about that is, if as long as you're building that rapport with them properly, with the whole entire, not plopping them in front of TV and actually making them actually address situations and problems properly, you would never run into this problem in the end. I mean, you might have like a 1% chance of them running into the problems at the end of the day, depending on how bad you are or how, you know, a variable basically. There's always going to be exceptions to the rule for all intents and purposes. So it'll be like a 1-2% chance that they're out there acting stupid and acting like spoiled brats, or acting like, they're oppressed when they're really not oppressed in the least bit, sadly. And this is one of those things where you have to realize as a parent that, it was one of those things that you kind of sort of bought on yourself for all intents and purposes. So in this information age, you always want to be open and honest with your children, no matter what. No matter if you like it or not, you always want to be open and honest with your children. The minute you're not open and honest with your children, and that's when a lot of shit happens. And you never want that to be a thing. You never want that to be a problem for your children for all intents and purposes. You never want those problems. Um, another thing that you'll run into if you Another thing that you'll run into if you're a parent is, um, your ability to parent, and the fact that you'll worry too much. You never want to worry too much, because the minute you start worrying too much, then you start overthinking things. When you start overthinking things, you start punishing your children for things that you think up in your head, sadly, when in fact you should just be doing it. You should be just parenting and letting them figure it out instead of trying to figure it out for them. Because the sad part about that is you'll start end up raising children that aren't adjusted for the world, and you'll get these lovely people that we got now in colleges that need a safe space, or you'll get these people that think they're oppressed, or or entitled people for all intents and purposes. When you do it wrong, you'll get those type of people. Sadly, another problem with parenting and worrying is people's ability to overthink or overshoot or overcompensate when they're parenting. You never want to overcompensate. You want to give it just right, or you want to give the right amount based on each child. Every child is different, so you can't parent a child the same way. You can't parent all children the same way. If you have multiple children, you have to parent them differently according to their personalities and their traits and stuff like that, and their behaviors and your mannerisms also. On top of that, they need to be nurtured separately. They all your children together, but they need to be nurtured. They all need to be nurtured separately in their own distinct way. This is typically where a lot of parents mess up when they have multiple children. They don't quite understand the different needs between their children until it's too late, or until it's later in life. And the sad part about that, when the children are growing and learning all this stuff, it's that's when you should be trying to understand what their interests and stuff like that. I mean, you might understand their small interests, but when it comes to their larger interests, you got to understand that quickly and understand, because the sad part about this, it's all about communication with your child. Despite the fact that your child's mind might change like the wind, there's always going to be those permanent things there that your child are into, or like, or are interested in for all intents and purposes. Despite the fact that their mind will change like the wind around them, sadly. Another problem that a lot of parents have that they typically don't really talk about is, when it comes to worrying, is their overbearingness. Overbearingness basically comes from the fact that you worry too much about what you did. The sad part about that is when you start worrying too much, you start forgetting things that you need to teach your child. So you never want to be overbearing to your child for this reason, because if you are, you'll find out very quickly that you'll forget stuff that you wanted to teach your children, or you'll forget things that you quite possibly needed to teach your child, but you never really got around to teaching your children for all intents and purposes. So it's one of those things where you don't want to mess that up and mess up a chance to actually teach your children things properly if you're over worrying. Because the sad part about that is, the more you worry, the more you forget. The more you forget, that's a lesson that your child just missed, or you could have taught your child for all intents and purposes. Because you need to worry less about what's going on around your child and more so what you're actually teaching your child because the outside world really doesn't matter if you teach your children properly or if you are a positive influence in your children's life. The outside world really doesn't matter around it, sadly. As long as you do everything in your power to be there for your child and teach them the proper things that they need to learn about being a child, basically, because they don't have to be an adult. They just have to be a child and they have to progress properly. The minute you rush them, the minute you try to rush their growth is the minute, you start running into problems, or the minute you slow down their growth is the minute you start running into problems. But if you let them grow according to who they are as a human being, because your children are human beings and they do think for themselves sometimes and they will get themselves into troubles and binds. You have to help them. Either you have to help them figure it out or you have to let them figure it out. So it's one of those things where you let them figure it out first. If they can't figure it out, or if they can't figure it out, then you give them helpful hints to basically help them out. The minute you keep on giving them helpful hints, then when those helpful hints don't work, then you eventually have to actually give them the necessary, uh, point them in the necessary direction so to help them out for all intents and purposes. Because sadly, there are a lot of children that don't even know that they're in half the messes that they're in. Sadly, they just think that I'm in it and I can't get out of it. When in fact they can get out of it. It's almost like a baby self-soothing themselves for all intents and purposes, be equivalent as they're getting older. You basically want your children to be able to solve their own problems, the same way a baby self-soothes herself. So you basically just want to give them the ability or give them the tools that they need to solve their problem. You never want to just do it for them because the minute they can do that themselves is the faster they don't really need you and they can make proper decisions. And the sad part about that is those decisions that they make help actually institute how much trust you actually have in your child based on their decisions and the decisions they made and how they came to those conclusions. It's basically like if you ever went to school back in the day, way back when they asked you to show your work when you did math problems. So you basically let them solve their own problems, then ask them to tell you how they arrived at this, how they arrived at this juncture, or how did they arrive at this decision that they made to actually progress as children or human beings in this world. So you typically want to ask them how they arrived at this. That's the irony to it. So if you don't ask them that, you're basically not going to learn anything. You're not going to learn what makes your child tick. You always want to know what makes your child tick. The minute you stop trying to figure out what makes your child tick is when you start running into a shit ton of problems that you really don't want. That's a major problem that a lot of parents have in this day and age. They typically run into a lot of problems that, they don't need to run into, that is not necessary for all intents and purposes. That could have been avoided. Like you basically want to ask your child how they arrived at the conclusion that they arrived at to solve their problem. So you can learn how basically learn how your child ticks and what makes them tick, how they think, how strategic are they, how less strategic are they, and their mental status and their mind state when they actually do it, when they actually come to those conclusions. So that's a big thing. And when it comes to social media, you never plop your child in front of social media to solve a problem. You basically address the problem as a parent. Because typically, what happens in this world is a lot of parents basically stick an iPad in front of them, or stick a sucker in their mouth, or candy in their mouth, and you're basically letting your child know that they get rewarded for bad behavior, or they get rewarded for any time they do something wrong. This is typically why we ran into the problems of these lovely people, these so-called grown adults today in college or all over the place, all over social media, saying that they feel oppressed or they feel threatened or they feel bothered or they feel all this other great shit that they really don't feel because they don't even know how to express themselves properly because they didn't grow up in proper households where the tools that they were needed for them to grow up in proper households weren't given to them. Basically, this is how you get the feminists. This is how you get the drug dealers, the addicts, the runaway children, the teen pregnancies, and all this other craziness that you'll get in life. You never want that problem. That problem is a serious problem that you need to nip in the butt very early, or it's not going to really pan out too well for you for all intents and purposes if you let it progress on for no reason whatsoever. You never want a problem to you never want a problem to progress longer than it really is, and you never want your child to turn out like these idiots in society that feel oppressed or feel like they're that got to make an excuse for how they feel because they can't manage their feelings, so they got to make it so everybody else is responsible for their feelings instead of being able to take responsibility for their own actions, sadly. And the sad part about that, you get a lot of people who do this on a regular basis, and it's just fucked up in life how these children grow up, sadly. And it's like one of those things where it's like, what is the point of raising this child in this world when they're going to grow up like this? Well, there's ways to mitigate that and or get around that. And the sad part about that is one, start by not sticking your child in front of an iPad or putting the iPad in front of your child when they're throwing a temper tantrum. Address your child's problem. Don't spoil them when they have a temper tantrum. Address their problem or show them that what they're doing is inappropriate for the time and place for all intents and purposes. Because if you don't tell them that what they're doing, if you don't let them know or tell them what they're doing is inappropriate for all intents and purposes, they will keep on cutting up and they will keep on doing that behavior and they will repeat that behavior over and over again. A good example of that is go back to my discipline video, which was Red Pill Parenting 5. When it comes to discipline, and you'll figure that out very quickly on why it's not a great idea um, to let your child just run wild for all intents and purposes. It's sad, but it's true. And the sad part about that is a lot of parents don't quite understand why their children are acting the way they do and or why they're being the way they are or why they perceive the world the way they do or you know why they're growing up and talking back and being unruly like they are. The sad part about that is you as a parent fucked up somewhere and it's probably too late to address it, but it's one of those things where it's like you have to realize that and you have to realize that for your next child to make that next child better for all intents and purposes. Because the sad part about that is that older child is probably a lost cause. High probability it's a lost cause. So you have to, focus your efforts on the next child to make sure that child doesn't grow up fucked up, depending on the age gap between your children. It's sad to say it, but it is what it is. It's one of those things where, like, nature's going to have to take its course with that child, and that child's going to have to learn the hard way. If not, then the whole entire world and government will pretty much capitulate, and we'll end up in a fucked up society like we are now, especially in America, Australia, UK, Spain, places like that. You'll end up in fucked up societies like that, where you got a bunch of women running around talking about making all the fucking rules and oppressing everybody else under them. Sadly, and they swear up and down this is for equality, but they're oppressing everybody under them. Um, or their definition of equality is skewed or fucked up at best, or their whole entire belief system is skewed or fucked up at best as well too. So typically, you want to avoid raising children like the SJWs, feminists, Antifa, Black Lives Matter people altogether. You want to avoid raising your children that way because the sad part about that is you don't have to worry about your children if you raise them properly. You don't have to worry about the outside world if you raise your children properly. The sad part about that is all your children need is a proper set of morals, guidelines, a proper set of morals and a proper set of guidelines and some culture behind it, basically, that will pretty much wrap it in a pretty bow to make your children a successful person in society. It's typically the fundamental difference between, how a lot of the Asian kids that go to college. What you'll notice is not too many Asian people fall into the category of SJW. A small minority of Asians do. The sad part about that is the reason why that happens because this is how you can tell the difference between lax Asian parents and strict Asian parents. Typically, the most strict Asian parents don't run into that problem because they'll typically just pull their child out of school and say, fuck it, you're not going to school because you fucked up and you're fucking up my money. It's typically how it works. The same thing goes for you know parents who send their children to school from Ecuador or Bolivia or Peru, Latin America to America, basically. Typically, that's the money that they got, and therefore, if they fuck it up, they'll be willing to pull them out of school because what's the point of wasting money on a child that's willing to fuck up and fuck up your money for all of these purposes? Because there's no point in dropping money on a fuck up. Is typically how they view it. The same thing goes for Nigerian parents. If you've ever noticed, they typically are more strict And Caribbean parents, they typically are more strict for the fact that their money is important to them. So where they put their money is based on importance and how their children grow up. The sad part about that is you want your child to grow up and you want them to have the opportunities, but you don't want to drop money on a child like they're a bottomless pit if they're fuck ups for all intents and purposes. So you typically gear them for the real world for this reason. And this is typically why you see a lot of the Afro Caribbeans doing well in college. You see a lot of the Africans doing well in college, which is actually pretty funny. You know, I mean, they all excel. Half them I'll excel, most of them I'll excel the Asians in college, which is actually pretty interesting for all intents and purposes for a group of people. And the sad part about that, they have about the same, if not less the opportunity that a lot of the African Americans have here in the United States, but they typically run into this problem. They typically run into this problem, they mitigate it and they make it better so their children can grow up properly. And not, and because the sad part about that, the difference between African Americans and the difference between Afro Caribbeans and Africans and that Afro Latinos and Latinos and Asians is typically they have culture. They have culture, they have morality, they have culture, and they have guidelines that they all live by for all intents and purposes. And the sad part about that, those set of guidelines and that culture and that morality basically keeps their children from being stupid people in society, or keeps them from doing stupid shit in society. Sadly, the sad part about that is African Americans lack this. They lack this culture, they lack this morality, and they lack this set of guidelines. The sad part about that, when you talk to different African Americans, you realize that the lines are blurred and everything is skewed on what's right and what's wrong and what's this and what's that for all intents and purposes, sadly. And it's not till they get older and they ran through the ringer, and it's a bit late in life where they realize, okay, yeah, I lived a fucked up life. I got to straighten this shit out for all intents and purposes. When it comes to the other groups of people, they typically know that this is right and wrong, and if I fuck up, my family is going to be very disappointed in me. The sad part about that is the disappointment is lacking in the African American community, unless you're like an educated lame. Then everybody's disappointed in you because you're an educated lame. Sadly, um, that's something that a lot of people don't seem to get or understand when it comes to parenting. Because at the end of the day, when it comes to parenting, you run the risk of destroying your children from the lack thereof parenting, or the overabundance of parenting. You want to parent just right. You don't want to ever overindulge or overdo it in a parenting department. You never want to underdo it in a parenting department. And this is typically one of those things where it basically comes down to you learning your child. When you can learn your child, you learn more things about your child, so you never have to worry about shit like this, or you never have to worry or have it on your back burner because you have more faith in your child, basically, instead of having less faith in your child. Because the sad part about that, your child's happiness, no matter if you like it or not, is key to their growth. When your child is upset because you're smothering them or you're overdoing it, that's a problem. Just like if your child's upset and you just give them a sucker, or slide an iPad or electronic in front of their face so they can be happy, you typically run into this problem too as well. So it's one of those things where it's like if you overdo it, you're going to find out as they progress in life, and if they underdo it, you're going to find out very quickly and on their behavior, on the behavior that they pursue, because they'll basically learn that if you underdo your parenting, they'll basically learn that if I act a fool or cry or whine or do stupid shit, I'll be rewarded for my behavior for all intents and purposes. So why straighten up why straighten up in the first damn place? Typically is how it works. So what you want as a parent is you want your child to understand that you're there for them and understand that their happiness is key. And for them to achieve it is all you want in their life. Even if it's some independence, you got to let them have some independence. Sadly, you can't overcoddle your children. The minute you overcoddle your children, do you run into spoiled brats running around her acting stupid, like the ones in college, or like the ones that need a safe space, or like the ones who want to riot, that get all this time on their hands to riot and do stupid shit and destroy shit and destroy society and destroy historical things in society. You're basically running into these problems as a parent, basically, which is very sad. You never want your child to be like that. But the sad part about that, if you spoil your child or overindulge your children, this is typically the type of people you get. You get a bunch of middle class people, middle upper class women running around saying that they're oppressed, or you get a bunch of middle upper class men trying to act like SJWs for all intents and purposes, or you'll get a lot of middle class men who just don't know where they exist in life because they've been indoctrinated, which actually brings me to my next point when it comes to media. The sad part about media is, yes, media can have an influence on your child if you let it. The sad part about that, if you have no boundaries and your children have no boundaries and your children have no morality or no culture or no guidelines to actually guide them, all these things to guide them in life, your children are going to fall prey to stupidity. And the sad part about that is it's as long as they have the morals, the guidelines, and the culture to help them through life, it's pretty much going to be a successful. It's going to be a successful child. Like I said, there are exceptions to the rules when it comes to it. When it comes to children, there are exceptions to the rules. Sadly, what a lot of people don't know is when you when you when you overindulge your children, or when you I'm sorry, when you actually when you overdo it with your children, you typically destroy them. You destroy their morality, you destroy their culture, you destroy their guidelines because you let them know that they have free reign to do whatever the fuck they want. And that's when you overindulge them. When you underdo the parenting, you basically raise spoiled brats, but it's a bit different. You end up raising children that'll commit more crimes, get pregnant at a young age, do alcohol, do drugs, get into illicit activities, and probably end up arrested for all intents and purposes, or end up runaways too, for all that matter. And the sad part about that, you run into these problems for the reason that your parenting sucks. And the minute you have to worry about your parenting is the minute when you know your parenting sucks. The minute when you actually could think about something, tell your child something, and you don't have to worry about it or have to rethink it, is when you know your parenting is very sound. And typically I never run into any problems with my children when I tell them something. They typically follow through with it, and I have confidence that they'll follow through with it because typically they do. And this is something that a lot of people don't understand or get or quite grasp when it comes to children. As long as your children follow through with it, you'll be fine. The minute your child's not following through with it, then you got to worry. Or if it's something that was unclear to your child, typically your child will look at you crazy like, okay, what did you mean? And typically you'll just repeat yourself and handle it from there for all intents and purposes. But you'll run into people who don't want to repeat themselves, but it's important that you repeat yourself so your child can understand what you're doing. Every child learns at a different rate. Every child grows at a different rate. Every child progresses at a different rate, and every child will come into their own at a different rate. So if you have the morality, culture, and guidelines for your children, you never have to worry about media sabotaging what you built within your child and your child's growth. The sad part about that is typically when a lot of people go off to school, because the reason why they're so influenced is because the lack of parenting or the over parenting that goes on in this world today. So you get a lot of these people that are SJWs, feminists, Antifa, all these other people, all because of either the lack of parenting or the over parenting that they received as children. It is what it is. And the sad part about that is overindulging your children or underindulging your children. I mean, under parenting your children is both bad for your child for all intents and purposes. So it doesn't really matter if you're overdoing it or overcompensating, you're basically destroying your child. If you're undercompensating, then you're definitely destroying your child, and you're destroying the growth of your child mentally, emotionally, and physically. And when you overindulge your child, you pretty much stunt the growth of your child mentally, emotionally, and physically as well. Also, so typically you want to dodge or avoid overindulging your children, or not being there for your children as much as humanly possible, because we live in an age where people, instead of dealing with their children's problems, like I said, they pretty much just stick a piece of electronics in front of their face or stick candy in their mouth or junk food in their mouth so they can shut up, basically, when you should be dealing with the problem right then and there. That's the cold reality. But nobody wants to talk about that, and everybody wants to pretend like they're great parents when in fact you're doing nothing more than making your child worse than what they are now later on down the line. Then you're going to be sitting there on Dr. Phil like, I can't control my child, or Mari like, I can't control my child, or one of these talk shows talking about how you can't control your child. And it's the reality of the day. That's pretty much the finished product. When you overindulge your children or when you underparent your children, this is typically the problems that you run into, or you'll see like the runaways, the teen pregnancies, the alcoholism, the drug use, the overrepresentation of people in prison for all intents and purposes when you underparent or overparent your child for all intents and purposes. You want your child to grow at a perfect rate or a rate that's good for them. You never want to force your child into things and live vicariously through your children for this reason because you got to let your child be its own. You got to let your child be their own person. You can't enforce things on your child because you didn't do it as a parent or you couldn't do it as a parent, basically. So therefore, now you want your child to do it because you didn't quite live up to your dreams. So now you want to live vicariously through your child or force your child into activities that they don't want to be in, and they'll resent you later for it. And the sad part about that, it's all about building that rapport or building that interaction with your child, not to be your child's friend. You want to be your child's parent. That makes it so you never have to worry about outside pressures manipulating your child into stupid shit for all intents and purposes. Because the minute that happens, you know you fucked up somewhere as a parent. The sad part about that, like I said, there are exceptions to the rules where these children grow up fucked up. And it's one of those things where it's like, well, genetically, they probably inherited some genes from somebody in the family that happens to be very bad or very sadistic or very, you know, antisocial or something along the lines of that when it comes to, you know, psychological elements, basically, or, you know, diagnosis is, it's typically, some of them are pretty much genetic. So it's like you never really see it coming, sadly. But for the most part, a lot of these children that grow up are well adjusted and they typically don't run into too many problems. And they grow up pretty well. I mean, there's an outlier for children who grow up this way and they will act up or act a fool. There's an outlier for everything. It is what it is. But what you don't want to do is hinder your child's growth for all intents and purposes. And you want to address all the problems and you don't want to just stick an iPad. Like a good example when it comes to punishment that I kind of sort of left out is I think I said mentioned in Red Pill Parenting 5 is take all the shit out of their room and leave them their necessities, their clothes, the books that they need to study, and their bed and stuff like that, and an alarm clock. Take out their PlayStation, Xbox, all their game consoles, their computers, their iPads, their everything, their telephones, everything. Take it all out of their damn room and make them understand that they have to learn a lesson. The minute they learn that, then they wouldn't want to live without, and they'll appreciate shit more. The sad part about that is the reason why children don't appreciate things in this day and age is because you typically put them on punishment and they go back to their room with their computer or their PlayStation or their Xbox or their gaming consoles or their handhelds or their iPads and all this other great shit. And it's like, you can't really teach a child to appreciate shit if you're sending them back to a room that got all the shit in it for all intents and purposes, where you're not even taking it away and putting them on punishment. You got to take all that shit and take it out of their room so they can know that this shit is serious, so they can learn a lesson. The sad part about that, sending them to their room, you're doing nothing more than spoiling them and just trying to get a peace of mind for yourself, when in fact you should be addressing your child's problem. This is typically how a lot of people run into the children's behavior that they run into today. And it is what it is. Like, you basically want to address it properly. You want to address it in a way where your child understands that this is not okay, and you're not going to be rewarded for any time you act like a fool, basically. And you will give them a smack bottom if it comes to that for all intents and purposes. Don't overdo it. Just a couple swats is good enough for all intents and purposes. 1, 2, maybe 3, depending on what the situation is. And that's one of those things that you have to learn as a human being. Another thing that you have to learn, because I've noticed this in this day and age with the parenting, is projection parenting. And what I mean by that is, this is probably not something that's been explored in a manosphere, but projection parenting is typically children who grow up without a father. and they want to be a father to a child that's not theirs. Projection parenting. So typically their mindset is, I grew up without a father, and I don't want this child to grow up without a father. So therefore, I'm going to be there for this child, or I'm going to date this woman because I want to be there for her and her child, basically. Now you're projection parenting. The question is, do you love the child? Do you love the woman? Do you love the child? Or do you love the woman and you want to protect the child? You never want to protect the child. You want the child to grow. Because the sad part about that, if you get into a situation where you're raising a child that's technically not yours, and they know they're not your father, you're gonna run into a lot of resentment. If you get a child early and they think you're your father and they find out you're not their father, you're probably going to run into problems down the line because they feel as though they've been lied to for all intents and purposes. So it's one of those things where you're going to run into this problem no matter what, if you like it or not. So you never want to try to be a projection parent, basically. So if you're dating a woman to take care of her children because you want them to grow up somewhat adjusted and protect them, you're going about it the wrong way. Even though you love the women, you're going to destroy the children at the end of the day. Um, you never want it to be that way. You basically want to forge, as a step parent, you basically want to forge a step parent, or a step parent to another child. You basically want to forge a bit of a different relationship. You don't really want to be dad. You want to be the responsible. You want to be more responsible guardian than you want to be parent for all intents and purposes. You want to be there for them, so you kind of sort of got to walk a fine balance between being their friend and being there for them and being their guardian and protecting them from you know anything. The sad part about that, if you try to raise a child as your own, it is not your own. You're going to run into a world of hurt. You're going to run into a lot of problems. You're going to run into a lot of resentment. You're going to run into a lot of anger. You're going to run into a lot of shit that you don't need to run into, that could have been mitigated if you would have did it properly. Typically, as a typically as a parent raising somebody else's child, you want to have the fine balance of being a responsible guardian or a chaperone is the best way I can put it to you. You don't want to be that overbearing chaperone. You want to be there just enough, and you want to protect them. You want to be there and make sure their safety is your main concern. You being their parent is not really your concern. You being a friend or being there when they need you is what they really need. Because the sad part about that is what you'll do is you'll raise children who resent you or tell you you're not my real father, so you can go to hell for all I care. They'll typically say the most evil is off the wall shit to you when they do this. The sad part about that, you never want to do that. You never want to raise your children in this manner if you're going to be that stepfather, if you're going to be that father for all intents and purposes. You basically just want to be the responsible guardian and somewhat their friend. This is the only time when I ever suggest that you be a child's friend when it comes to parenting. When you're a stepfather or that person that's not really their biological father, you typically want to strike up a balance between guardian and friendship for all intents and purposes. You never want to overdo it or try to overdo it because the children will resent you. Even if you raise them at a young age and they know you're not, they're going to resent you later on in life. They're going to make it so you feel it. Matter of fact, I have a friend who goes in on his stepdad till this day. He cracks me up. I'm not going to say his name, but he goes in on his stepdad till this day because his stepdad is very overbearing. And if he's watching this, he's pretty much going to know I'm talking about him, and he's probably going to call me like, "Why you got to put me on blast, Tico?" But yeah, this is why I'm not saying his name. So yeah, he goes in on his stepdad all the time. We talk about it. I sit there and laugh about some of the shit that his stepdad does and he does to his stepdad, and it's like the funniest shit in the world. It's like, yeah, he's overcompensating and he's not. He's trying to do something that he's not for all intents and purposes, or he's trying to fit a role that he's not able to fit or not supposed to fit. He's typically supposed to just be the responsible guardian and your friend. So that's it. You're not supposed to overdo the friendship. You're both supposed to be friend enough to when they have a problem, they come to you and they can address it. That's about it. You don't need to be their best friend. You don't need to go out and drink with them. You don't need to go out and have dinner with them. You don't need to go out and do all this extra shit. All you got to do is just be there for all intents and purposes when it comes to it. And I might sound mean to a lot of step parents, but that's all you really need. Unless you have a bit of a different relationship with the stepchild, then that's all you really need is just to basically do that. And if you have that relationship with your stepchild where you can be the parent, then that's one thing. But the sad part about that, if you don't have that relationship, don't force it on them. Just do your best to be there and be a responsible guardian instead of trying to be a responsible parent. That's typically all you can do. Think of it like being a foster parent. You're really not that person's parent. You're just that person's legal guardian. That's it. That's it. And that's all you really have to do. And that's all you really have to ever do and address when it comes to it. Um, so never overdo it. Never take on somebody because of your own selfish or virtue signaling things of because I didn't have one, I want to be here for this child and make it so. You never want to do that because you'll destroy that child and you'll destroy the relationship that you could possibly have with that child for all intents and purposes. Um, I think that's about it for this. If I have to make another one, I'll make a Red Pill Parenting 7 and I'll address those topics as they come along. I think I pretty much covered everything that I needed to cover. Let me double check here in my let me double check here in my things to see if I addressed everything. I think I already covered my thoughts on it. And after every single thing, I cover my thoughts, my final thoughts after every single topic. The outcome, parenting rejection, worrying. I cover worrying at the beginning. Uh, Parenting in this information age, I covered that at the beginning. Media influence, I covered that also as well. So I am pretty much done. Whoever's watching, thank you for watching. Whoever's popped in and popped in, thank you for popping in or watching or popping in and watching. Appreciate it. Pleasure serving the Red Pill community. Y'all be good to yourselves and do nothing but treat yourselves like milk and do nothing but spoil yourselves and make yourself a better version of yourself. Never settle and always be willing to progress as a human being and as a person in life for all intents and purposes. Um, this is an internal sadist. You be good, be blessed, and it's a pleasure serving the Red Pill community. And outros.
You look like it. Yeah.